The following views are not necessarily endorsed by this radio station.
We're speaking with Michelle Pearce, CEO of the Australian Christian Lobby. Firstly, Michelle, what is the Australian Christian Lobby?
It's a political lobby group. We lobby politicians on issues that Christians are concerned about across the nation. We have influence on public policy, and also we educate Christians around the nation as to what the key issues are and enable them to campaign alongside us.
Now, you've created a website, australiavotes.org.au. How should people use it?
australiavotes.org.au is a website where we have compared all of the policies of the major parties on issues of concern to Christians, and also allowed candidates to respond to a question that we've put to them so Christians can compare the positions of the parties and also see the values of their candidates.
How have you chosen the policy questions addressed on the website?
There are a broad range of issues that Christians are concerned about. We couldn't ask parties 100 questions, so we had to condense it to those that we really believe are pertinent to our nation at this very moment. So I think that Christians who come from many different perspectives will be able to appreciate the answers that are given on the website.
And finally, Michelle, what would be your encouragement to Christians as the election draws closer?
Go onto the website australiavotes.org.au and be informed. If all Christians are well informed and if we all vote according to truth, then we can have a significant impact on the outcome of the election.
Authorised by M. Pearce for the Australian Christian Lobby Canberra, station sponsor.
I love it when people step forward and have a conversation that's a little awkward for some. So often at the start we're like, oh, I don't like this conversation. Why are we having this? Why are we talking about this? And then by the end you go, wow, aren't we all better off for somebody actually speaking about that awkward, difficult conversation? Well, Peter Goldsworthy is really doing that about his whole life journey. He's written this book, The Cancer Finishing School. It's talking about his end of life because of his journey. It truly was remarkable to be able to have a conversation with Peter Goldsworthy. Let's get stuck into that conversation now. Peter Goldsworthy joins us. G'day, Peter.
Hi, Clayton.
It's so good to have a conversation with you about, I suppose, the way you are approaching a whole heap of your life and the encouragement you're giving to others. Maybe we might start a little bit around your profession. And you have been a doctor for many, many years. Could you tell us about what sort of medicine, medical areas you practice in and those sorts of things?
Yes, it's actually the 50th, half a century reunion of my medical year this year.
Wow.
It's very hard to believe, and it's very easy to deny it's been that long. But when I graduated, I worked for several years in alcohol and drug rehabilitation, and then went into general practice where I've been ever since. And it's which I've enjoyed, and I've enjoyed it more and more as I've got older. In fact, one of the stories in this is when I got sick about 6 years ago with this myeloma, cancer of the bone marrow, and or the blood cells, and I had to stop for 6 months, and I maybe wouldn't even get back. And surprise, surprise, I guess knocked me over the feather. I really missed my patients, that extended family you sort of develop over 45 years, whatever it was then, 44 years. Yeah, so that's sort of the story. Yeah. Of my professional career, yeah.
Yeah. And you referenced there that, there was this discovery of a cancer that occurred for you 6 years ago. And I suppose there's always cancer is going to impact doctors just as much as the rest of the population. But you know so much more about what is happening, and you see people's lives that are being changed through various illnesses that occur. Was it... When you got that diagnosis, was it something that your profession helped you emotionally cope with it because, you'd been through this with so many people, or did it sort of do the opposite of it? Almost, sometimes you can know too much about what's going on. How did you react?
Well, I think two interesting ways. I think that's true. I mean, there's certainly, I think one of the problems for a lot of people when they're given a diagnosis like cancer or any diagnosis with high stakes is the uncertainty of what it means and where you're going to be going and what the pathway will be. The steps, but there's certainly none of that for a doctor, or certainly in the case of myeloma, and I knew exactly what the kind of process would be. The outcome, I thought, would be a bit worse, because back then, 6 years ago, the 5-year survival rates were a bit lower than they are now. But chiefly, I think when I look back at it, I had a very strange defence mechanism, which I suppose is a form of denial, or which is one of the commonest defence mechanisms people with cancer use to avoid thinking about it, perhaps. But mine was, well, gee, I'm a doctor, I'm a writer, I've published a lot of books. What a gift cancer will be to me as someone with those two. That skill set, if you like, of medicine and writing, what a subject I've been given to write about. And that lasted some time, I think. It was that kind of, I'm not saying it's a false kind of euphoria. It was genuinely thought and generally felt. But I do think it helped me, cope with the knowledge of the diagnosis, yeah.
Yeah,
which is which is an incurable disease, but it can more and more be incurable for a decade or whatever.
Yeah.
More.
You did mention you're a writer as well, and this idea that this is sort of part, and we're talking. You've written many books that have been hugely successful. So we're not talking. You've written for the local newsletter, which is highly commendable in itself, but we are talking. You're a fair dinkum writer here too, Peter. So this moment of understanding and putting that together was you talked about as a gift. This idea of intertwining these. What has been the play out of that gift as you've sort of unwrapped it and understood it and seen it? What have been the blessings of it? I suppose is we pretty obvious some of the struggles of that, but what have been some of those blessings?
Well, I think the title, The Cancer Finishing School, I suppose, which is an amusing title or an ironic title or whatever, but implicit in it is what lessons it might teach you, or before it finishes you off or whatever. But then, what lessons does life teach us before it finishes off? So, in a sense, that's what the book is, if it's about anything. And I think it's a long way around, and it's a long book, and there are lots of. And to stop it just being another, I suppose I was worried about just being about me, about being, a narcissistic kind of navel-gazing. But you are entitled to do a bit of navel-gazing when you've got cancer. It is about you. But to stop, to sort of interrupt that, I decided. And what would happen is late night in bed, stories of my patients would pop back into my head. If I wasn't sleeping, stories from decades ago that were also not necessarily always cancer stories, but high-stakes stories that contained lessons, whether they were cautionary tales or exemplary tales, whether they were stories of human courage or stupidity or whatever. And so there are a lot of those in it. And I think I've learned as much from thinking about my patients, the lessons they learned, or maybe the lessons I learned from them, as my own. But I think you come down in the end, and it's as I say, it's a long way around. To maybe learn a few really essential, almost cliched truths, about love, about resilience, and about at least trying to be stoical. These, I think, are the lessons that, particularly love, I think. And I've been very fortunate I have patients who have to go through these ordeals on their own. But, I've been surrounded by family, and so certainly one of the lessons is that really obvious, another obvious truism, but count your blessings. And you used the word earlier. And I think, maybe I certainly have taken a lot for granted in my life. I've had a lucky life and a privileged life, and I think it's certainly forced a re-examination of that kind of luck. I mean, just the luck of having cancer in this country, not another country where you get $1 million treatments paid for by, you and your listeners, the taxpayers. We're tremendously fortunate. I mean, in the US, I was reading recently, 2/3 of individual bankruptcies, that's, not companies, but individual bankruptcies are medically related. People, and this is a rich, very rich country. So we're lucky. And, compared to the third world, of course, it's just even luckier. So those sort of things have all come back to haunt me from time to time. I've of that. And, is it deserved? And, what have I done to deserve that? And et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. In terms of the conversation, it does feel like that society-wise, we tend not to want to have conversations about death, and it's sort of understandable on one hand, of course, that we don't want that. None of us want to head to that space and all those sorts of things. But it's also one of those ones that we're all going to have to face, and yet we tend not to talk about it. Has that been something that, partly because of the way you write, because of your humour, and I think it's probably fair to say that you're all right to have a bit of that darker sense of humour at time, and in that regards, and even as you said, the title of the book, The Cancer Finishing School, is that a way to open up that conversation more? Have people pushed back against your conversations, or have they sort of said, oh, well, he's having the conversation, so therefore I can actually get in on it now?
Well, certainly, just in the book itself, I've had a lot more mail about it, saying that it's been a solace or comfort or, made people laugh. But not everyone, I guess. I've always been, I suppose, in a literary sense, in my writing, known for my black humour, among other, I hope, other virtues, maybe it's a vice. And that, I think doctors in general probably develop a certain gallows humour to get them through some of the emotionally difficult things that, and not just doctors, of course, anyone who is involved in, high-stakes human dramas. So I think, but you can't expect, I used to think, well, I've always joked with my patients, but, some things you don't joke about, obviously. And there's some people I wouldn't risk certain jokes with, but I still think it's, the old Reader's Digest thing, laughter, when I used to read my mum's, laughter is the best medicine. There was always a column. And it's certainly, I'm not saying it's the best medicine, it is, but it's very good medicine in many, but not all situations, let's put it that way.
Yeah. Peter Goldsworthy is my guest. He's the author of the book, The Cancer Finishing School, diagnosed himself about 6 years ago, and written this book reflecting a lot on his own life, but as he said, using other stories and conversations as well. We're going to be back with Peter in a couple of minutes' time, talking towards this understanding of what can we learn from his story. The show is called Towards Understanding. So what is it? It's part of the reason for the book, and Peter will share a few of those thoughts with us next here on Towards Understanding.
The following views are not necessarily endorsed by this radio station.
This federal election, make an informed choice by knowing where political parties and candidates stand on the issues that shape our nation when you go to australiavotes.org.au. It cuts through political spin with a clear Christian values-based comparison of party policies and responses on issues affecting you and your community. Make your vote count by being informed and prepared at australiavotes.org.au. Thanks to the Australian Christian Lobby.
Authorised by M. Pearce for the Australian Christian Lobby, Canberra. Program sponsor.
Peter Goldsworthy is my guest. Now, he's an acclaimed author and has been a doctor, as we heard, 50 years this year as well. And so when he got diagnosed with cancer 6 years ago, as I loved your phrasing of it too, Peter, said, look, I'm a doctor, I'm a writer. Maybe this is a gift, this conversation, and what an attitude to take towards that. I am interested in the things that you have learnt. As you mentioned, the idea of the Cancer Finishing School is what are the things that teaches us to help change, and that's the idea of a finishing school, right? And obviously we're going to take a whole lot of that as well as yourself from this. What are part of the things that you learnt? Is it one of them even what you talked about with how you approach it with an attitude? Your attitude of, is this a gift? Has that actually even helped you during this time rather than approaching it with dread?
I think so, and I think I alluded to the fact that in some sense it's easier for a doctor because there are no surprises or no, around the corner, and that uncertainty I think probably adds to the dread. So you know exactly what's coming. Hope, though, you always, even though you know what's coming, and you look at the percentages, and the 5-year survival rates and the different treatments. You might know the survival percentages there too. You still need hope, of course. And I was which I've been lucky to have with my particular kind of cancer. There are lots of drugs coming, and so I'm not sure what you do with some cancers when there is no hope. I don't know how you face that with as much. I mean, stoicism is easier, I think, if you can see chinks in the road ahead that you can squeeze through. But you may not squeeze through, but you can still cling to them. But certainly, I think resilience, the kind of resilience that I encourage in my patients and try to practice myself, a certain stoicism, and is very, very useful. But not all temperaments, I think, are capable of it, and or people who are suffering constantly, it's sort of irrelevant. If you're in constant pain, it's a whole different ballgame, I think, than occasional pain with interruptions or what have you.
Yeah. What are some of the other ones? We talked about love before. Are there other things that you've gone, look, if this actually really was a finishing school, and I'd be taking people through this and what I would be taking them through and the lessons, what are some of those other ones that you've grabbed a hold of that would be perhaps helpful for us as we listen to your story?
Well, I think it's that, in some sense, and this is another kind of well-trodden path before me, I use the poem Ithaca by the Greek poet Constantine Cavafy. Basically, it's the journey, really, not the arrival, that's important, to make the most of the journey as long as it lasts. And certainly, I think it's given me... I use the metaphor there of a couple of years ago, because the steroid drugs I take, I still take along with my regular chemotherapy, caused cataracts, and I had the cataracts removed, and that was a sort of Pauline sort of revelation that the world was much, much more technicolor and rich and beautiful than I'd remembered. And I know a lot of people say this, that when they had lenses put in and then their cataracts taken out. That is a sort of metaphor to the whole approach to life I'm trying to take. And I mean, it's easier said than done, that you're going to enjoy everything you can and appreciate anyway every moment. Carpe diem, whatever, carpe minutum. Seize every minute. But it's a reasonable thing to try and attain, I think, if you're not sure how much time you've got left, to make the most of it. And whether that's enjoying love and your family, but also just simple pleasures of eating, cooking. Cooking's become a great source of nourishment to me, and I don't mean the eating. I mean the actual. I mean the cooking somehow is spiritually nourishing. I find I take a lot more care with that than I used to. I used to be a bit of a functional kind of let's get this over with cook. But now I cook, I suppose, with more love. So love is a word that sort of intersects, I think, with what I'm talking about, with that kind of appreciation. I mean, loving the world more, not just the people in it, but loving its experiences it offers. It's art, it's science, it's music, all its pleasures.
Yeah. And I suppose for those immediately around you, is there something different to share and encourage those who are around somebody who is going through, an incurable cancer diagnosis, and than perhaps the general public? Is there a different take of things you'd say to those around you, and perhaps an encouragement for those who might be going through something similar?
Yeah, well, I think they're always, eagle-eyed for any sign of, and they worry. I know they worry, but it puts them at ease. I think if I'm not particularly worried, which I aren't, and one of my daughters, who's a doctor herself, a psychiatrist, she's sort of understands, but the others tend to get, and my wife too, of course. I didn't tell her until it was just the first person I told, but after radiologist had looked at the MRI of my knee and thought this, as well as needing a replacement, there was something wrong with the marrow. I didn't believe him, but I did go and have the blood test. But I didn't tell my wife for several days because I didn't quite believe it. That was denial. And I thought, well, there's no sense, upsetting her before there was a diagnosis. And as soon as the results came back from the protein lab, I told her, but she wasn't happy about that. So I kept it from her. So I don't keep anything from her, and I don't think I varnish, the truth or put a gloss on it. She always wants to know how my monthly tests are going, and I tell her, and or if there's an up and down, and so I think I tell the truth, but I tell it, I guess, with a kind of a reassurance that of what I feel about that. Yeah.
Peter, you've written this book. You've done it with humour. You've taken a moment when many others might have just said, "Well, I'm just going to focus on myself," and that would have been perfectly okay. But you're there for others to be a part of this, and I'm assuming it's also helped you as you've gone through it. Final question for me as we do wrap up is this idea of, as someone reads the book, the Cancer Finishing School, what would you hope that they walk away from the book with?
I think a kind of a resilient smile, maybe, depending what they're facing themselves. And certainly a lot of cancer patients have written to me about it. I mean, one of the things I think about is if you've got cancer, you tend not to want to look at books about it. You don't want to watch television programs about it. You don't want to see the word. The word just jumps off the page into you, and sort of slaps you around the cheeks. So I think that's, it's not just cancer that applies to. It might be, people who are going through divorce or whatever. I don't want to, people who are really troubled by things that have happened in their lives. I don't want to really know too much about other people. Sometimes it can be a comfort, though. So I hope it would be, but then, people who haven't got, they're the people who've got cancer, and many of them have written to me about that it did help them. Even one man who came up to me at a signing who had pancreatic cancer and only had 6 more weeks to live. Now, there's someone without hope, and it made me think a bit. Or what, he may have had religious hope, and he may have felt there was an afterlife, but that was different to someone with my kind of cancer, where there's always a little, new drug might be coming around. You get what I mean? And but then for people who read it who haven't got cancer, well, I think there are a lot of life lessons in there generally, I think, and particularly the stories of my patients. And I know that, well, they'll be amused, but I hope there'll be lessons there. Some of the things I've mentioned, and but also the stories of my patients, which are stories in that traditional sense. Many of them, they have an arc and they have a moral. I suppose I'll take morals away from those stories as well.
Yeah. Peter, you have agreed to share, there's a number of poems that do feature in the Cancer Finishing School as well. So you've agreed to read one of those as we close up. We thank you so much. I'll do all the official parts of finishing the interview, and then if you do that would be wonderful. So my guest on Towards Understanding today has been Peter Goldsworthy, author of The Cancer Finishing School. Peter, we thank you so much for your time, and thank you for taking us out on this poem.
Yeah, this is from the very beginning of the book, and it's, I think, the low point of my mood, you might say. It's called Tomorrow. I loved tomorrow from the first day we met, her secret promises, her sweet backward glances. Tomorrow was always the last thing on my mind before sleep. She made me feel special. Often we talked all night, her hopes and plans for us, our future, together. Years passed, passion faded, I began to take tomorrow for granted. At times she disappointed me, at times we quarrelled. But when I needed a hand, hers was always there for me, reaching back over difficult midnights, hauling me across. When did we begin to grow apart? When did she start telling me lies? When did I wait to find tomorrow had no time left for me at all? Well, it turned out she did have time left for me.
I love that. Peter, thank you so much again.
Yep. Thank you, Clayton. It's lovely to talk to you.
The following views are not necessarily endorsed by this radio station.
We're speaking with Michelle Pearce, CEO of the Australian Christian Lobby. Firstly, Michelle, what is the Australian Christian Lobby?
It's a political lobby group. We lobby politicians on issues that Christians are concerned about across the nation. We have influence on public policy, and also we educate Christians around the nation as to what the key issues are and enable them to campaign alongside us.
Now, you've created a website, australiavotes.org.au. How should people use it?
AustraliaVotes.org.au is a website where we have compared all of the policies of the major parties on issues of concern to Christians, and also allowed candidates to respond to a question that we've put to them so Christians can compare the positions of the parties and also see the values of their candidates.
How have you chosen the policy questions addressed on the website?
There are a broad range of issues that Christians are concerned about. We couldn't ask parties 100 questions, so we had to condense it to those that we really believe are pertinent to our nation at this very moment. So I think that Christians who come from many different perspectives will be able to appreciate the answers that are given on the website.
And finally, Michelle, what would be your encouragement to Christians as the election draws closer?
Go onto the website australiavotes.org.au and be informed. If all Christians are well informed and if we all vote according to truth, then we can have a significant impact on the outcome of the election.
Authorised by M. Pearce for the Australian Christian Lobby Canberra, station sponsor.